I don't know if I give a formal definition of it, but what I mean by syntax when I talk about syntax is one of the things that you have is the relation of what you're saying to programs of expectation in the mind about the way sentences are put together. So that a kind of energy that you always have moving through the poem is, an example of that is when I say this long complicated noun and then say is, you're expecting something to come. You're expecting what follows the is, and so there's a kind of heightened attention. There are two aspects of syntax in that way. One is just the sheer energy of movement that comes from the fact that the mind is always expecting a particular pattern of completion, which you can either satisfy, postpone, or frustrate. Do you see what I mean in the way that the thing is written? You can say, I went to the store, it was raining, I bought something, I saw some kids, I came back. Say, I went to the store and I bought something and it was raining and I came back. The syntax is compound. When you get to normal syntax, when I went to the store, after I bought something, then the mind is waiting to hear. You're not only delaying and postponing, you're making judgments about the relative importance of the experience. You're disposing the different parts of it. When, after I did this, that gets rid of that. When I did this, then, and then you know the important parts of it. The fact that you can do that in poem is like the ability to use line in drawing. It's the line of energy. You can make the syntax behave like a Charlie Chaplin walk. You can make it behave like a beat, a dance. And it's through, especially through syntactical delay and stuff like that, that the complicated poem is built. And Milton and Hart Crane, and I think it's a real complicated subject in a way. It bears on a lot of other things that we've been talking about. It bears on the problem of syntax. And I want to make 3 points about it, which are not directly to do with how to write political poetry, but I think clarify the issue a bit. I'll try to do it quickly. One is that the reason that there's confusion in America is because we're the oppressor and you and I are living comfortably. Hell, we're in the Napa Valley talking about poetry. That's very hard, and it makes for a lot of guilt. I should be doing something, and the guilt makes for the desire to write, will to write political poetry. That's a problem. The second part of this is that, specific to America, we're a Protestant country and a democratic country, and both those things meant plainness. There's some direct connection between that and being evil. And that's good. That American distrust is why poetry is not particularly valued. In the same countries where poetry is valued, it also has class associations. I was in Slovenia. It was the only one. As soon as people found I was a poet, they started calling me maestro. Okay, people don't particularly like poetry, but by God, they don't have to take their hats off. There's another part of that, which is that in almost all of those countries, the language of the country is the identity of the nation. And I don't think it's really true that the ordinary people know and read. I think that's really a lot of bullshit. Except in countries where, as in Greece, that it's actually been made into popular songs. Or in places like Russia where they're so stone-bored that they go to big poetry readings by not terrific poets instead of rock concerts. But in countries like Hungary and like Greece and Ireland, well, not so much true there, but the survival of the language was the survival of the people. Americans don't have that feeling about language. One, is that English is language, it's not our language. Secondly, America as an entity has never been under attack. It's never been threatened by extinction. My third point is about politics and political. And I think that we need to rethink our conception of the political poem. Or I think it's going to be very difficult to. The last poet who could conceive of convincingly of the very act of writing poetry as a political act was Whitman. That is, Whitman felt that the closer he could get to the center of life, of common life, the closer that he could get to the Northern European establishment in this country, and it redefined American politics in a way that Whitman wouldn't even recognize. It meant that to be political was to be an outsider involved in a movement, clamoring against those despicable people at the center of life. So people going about their ordinary business in Nebraska while we're subverting governments in the Caribbean make you full of rape. Don't you realize that the common life became hateful to us, not what we had in common? And that the idea that you wrote politically was that you wrote not as a father or a mother, not as an adult at the center of life, but as a daughter or a son in Oedipal rebellion at the fringes, speaking for some disenfranchised group. Our very idea of political is to be cut off from any possibility of politics, to be disenfranchised, to be powerless, to be an outsider. I go around to universities and give poetry readings, and people say, always the question, somebody from the YSL or something always asks, don't you feel like you're co-opting poetry by going around to universities and reading it? This is an absolutely American question, you know. A Swede would think that was an insane question. How is being involved with society co-opting poetry, which would be cut off from any possibility of a political life if it weren't involved with people and institutions? But we think if you have nothing to do with institutions, then you can be political. So in order to have a political poetry, it has to be a feminist poetry, it has to be a gay poetry, it has to be a black poetry, it has to be a poetry in sympathy with. I'm not saying that we are not the political oppressors and enemies in the world right now. We are, which, you know, if it weren't. But the fact is, our conception of how to write a political poem is never to stand at the center of a common life which we can all share. And it makes it impossible for us to write anything but the poetry of rebels and children when we try to write about politics. And maybe, and that won't be till that problem is somehow solved in American lives, that we can reclaim Whitman's imagination of our commonality and begin to write a political poetry that's authentically political in the way that Neruda's was, or someone who actually can speak somehow from the center of his nation as an ordinary person.